Hey everyone, I'm Aubrey Blanche, the founder of the MathPath and the Director of Ethical Advisory and Strategic Partnerships at the Ethics Center in Sydney, Australia. Now, I am so excited to talk to you today about something I've been thinking a lot about, which is the ethics of cognitive automation. And so I'm excited for you to join me today for this talk, Your Brain on AI. So I want to talk about the moment that we're all sitting in right now. The tech industry has this very binary idea about what's going on with AI. Either there's breathless optimism that it's going to solve every problem and make everyone super rich, or dystopian panic that we're going to get Skynet and AI is going to destroy the world. And well, I probably am a little further towards the deep concern about the effects of this technology. I think that this binary way of thinking is not actually helpful in helping us adjudicate the kind of issues that we're running into as we're seeing more and more knowledge work get automated by this technology. So today, I'm not actually going to resolve that tension for you, but I want to give you a better map of the terrain of what's going on at 3 different levels. I also want to put an idea forward to you that I hope that you carry forward, and that is that efficiency and productivity are not legitimate end goals in and of themselves. Now, what I'm trying to say is that we can choose better, more pro-human objectives, things like human flourishing, or even in an organizational sense, value creation. And in that way, we might think of efficiency or pushing productivity as one tactic to get there. But I really cannot sit with the idea that producing more stuff in and of itself is the kind of objective we should be orienting entire companies, initiatives, or regulatory frameworks towards. So today I want to talk about cognitive automation, or the encoding and automation of human judgment and professional expertise. And we're going to talk through that in a 3-level framing. I want to show you how this plays out for individuals, how it plays out at the team level, and then at the company and society level, because the stakes are interlocking and they compound. So, number 1, let's talk about you. So, cognitive automation isn't just changing what we do, it's actually changing who we become as thinkers, as judges, and as experts. So something that I spend a lot of time thinking about is the idea of automation bias. So automation bias is a fancy word for people who tend to have a tendency to favor AI-generated outputs over human judgment, even when the human is right. And a lot of this comes from the false belief that technology is more objective than humans are. And the research doesn't really back that up. AI technologies are embedded with the biases that exist in society. And because of the technical architectures of them, they often actually entrench and exacerbate those biases, meaning that without intentional design choices, testing, and monitoring, the technology might actually be worse than humans, especially in critical areas that involve protected characteristics or marginalized identities. But automation bias matters beyond error rates. And the reason that concerns me the most is because it actually erodes the experience of generating expertise. So that sense of knowing that we get, but also the contextual information that we get over the course of our careers that allow us to make those complicated decisions or to arrive at reasonable solutions outside the sample set that we've already been given. So my question to you at home is, when did you last override a system recommendation that came from AI? What did it feel like, and how long did you consider it before you accepted the machine output? The next issue on an individual level that I like to think about is the idea of cognitive offloading versus cognitive surrender. So these terms are really useful to distinguish. So offloading frees up bandwidth. So thinking about this like writing down your to-do list, like the Claude skill that I use to sub in for the executive functioning I mostly don't have, to using GPS for navigation. Surrender is different. Surrender is when the skill of judgment actually atrophies because we never had to use it. So this is especially risky for people who have had the ability to develop expertise, but through time and deference to algorithms, start to lose their ability to engage professional judgment. And think about what happens to someone who's junior, who's maybe entering the workforce in the next couple of years. What happens when a junior lawyer or an analyst or a software engineer never has to develop the instincts and the ability to judge because the model scaffolds every decision? In universities, we see this concern where students are writing for output and writing their essays with generative knowledge, meaning they're not actually developing the critical thinking skills that they would need to be successful. But that is not inevitable. AI can be used to scaffold critical thinking. Strategically using cognitive offloading has actually been shown to help students and professionals engage more deeply to develop their critical thinking skills. I'm a huge fan of the critical thinking bot, which you can find online. It is like the toughest interviewer you've ever played with, but I think it's a beautiful model of something that shows that AI can be used to challenge us and strengthen our critical thinking, but we have to be willing to engage in it. And often doing something like that is disincentivized by thinking about productivity or pushing more output, but rather having a more considered process of inputs. So the frame here to be concerned about is that when we talk about productivity or efficiency, we're often optimizing for output while quietly defunding and disincentivizing the kind of development that's required for human beings to function as, buzzword here, a human in the loop. If the humans don't have the judgment ability, it doesn't matter if your process documents say that they're the human in the loop, if the human isn't actually functionally capable of providing that oversight. And that's the third thing I want to talk about on the individual level. So we hear so many AI governance frameworks talking about that there will always be a human in the loop, but there's a practical problem. If humans have been cognitively de-skilled, or they just never developed the skills in the first place, then what is the loop actually going to catch? We might as well not have one at all. And this is not hypothetical, certainly in our workplaces, but this is also coming up in modern warfare contexts. And so this idea that we need to create the space for effective human judgment is critical across every sector of our society where AI is being deployed. So the key takeaway here is the individual ethical stakes are about more than job loss, which tends to dominate the headlines. They're about the preservation of human agency and the ability for humans to develop and deploy skills that are necessary for basically everything to function. Now, the second frame. What happens to your team? So what we know is that AI does not enter a neutral workplace. It enters one that's already shaped by power, visibility, and whose contributions get counted. Now, my first question when I'm working with clients to understand their AI transformation journey is, whose knowledge is automatable? When we decide what to automate, we're making implicit judgments about what knowledge has value. Patterns to think about: more strategic or creative roles, the ones that have historically been more open to workers with more privilege. So men, white people, non-disabled people, non-queer people, and people who possess many of those labels often get seen as being augmentable by AI, that they can co-work with it to create new outcomes. But roles that are seen as operational or administrative, routine, often get seen as places that AI can replace. And this is not neutral. We know that women, people of color, those with disabilities, are more likely to occupy these more junior roles or roles that are more operational. And so that means that deploying this technology, again, is not neutral. It has the risk of exacerbating existing biases in economic opportunity. And so people who are already benefiting from the current structures are going to benefit even more without very intentional deliberation about how and why AI gets used. So the challenge I have for all of you is this inevitable? My argument says no. Technical deployment is all about a set of choices. And while there might be best practices, the reality is that we're in a bit of a brave new world. And so the best practices are not necessarily all that tested. So what I would encourage you to do is say, how can we think differently? How do we think about whose knowledge is valuable and legible to these machines? The next issue that I think about is surveillance and its effect on behavior. So surveillance sounds like a big scary word, but it turns out that we kind of already have it a little bit at work. So think about that dot on your Teams instance that can show people that you're at work, but also productivity monitoring, AI flagged anomalies in keystroke data. The research is showing that people actually change their behavior when they know that they're being watched. So this, while it may often get positioned as a way to ensure productivity and engagement of employees, there's lots of research that shows it actually has a quite chilling effect on experimentation and dissent and creative risk-taking. So there's also a link to psychological safety. You cannot have both high surveillance and a genuinely psychologically safe, innovative culture. And so again, what are we to do about this on our teams? I think the question is putting to leadership, if AI transformation is a priority, understanding the ways that this might impact, asking, has this been considered? Is it being measured to prove that the business benefits that we're saying we'll get are likely in this context? And the last thing that I worry about, especially speaking to this audience, is the devaluing of undocumented labor. So I know how many of us have done things like taking meeting notes. At least that has an artifact associated with it. But what gets automated is often just what's already documented. And what gets documented reflects who has historically had power and the particular types of work that are seen as valuable. So let's be really honest. Things like relational labor, which is the cultural glue of organizations, those drive-by mentorship moments where no one's taking notes, but you're fundamentally transforming people's career trajectories. Navigational knowledge about the workplace and that institutional knowledge that's held in people's heads. This kind of labor and expertise is disproportionately performed by women, people of color, neurodivergent workers, and often those in junior roles. And this work is often what makes organizations actually function, but it is nearly invisible to the systems we're now building. And even at companies that are going hard into AI, what you're finding is that people are writing down more things because they desire for their work to be machine legible. But that can build in biases towards people who have learning differences or processing differences, or who communicate in ways that written language isn't great for. So the team level ethical question that I want you to ask is not, is this efficient? But whose work counts? And who gets a say in how we answer that question? Part 3, what happens to your company? So the organizational consequences of cognitive automation extend well beyond simple ops. They actually influence at the social level, law, economics, and structural risks to our entire society. So first, I want to talk a little bit about intellectual property. Existing IP law was built around products, processes, and creative works, not the automated replication of a person's expertise. Now, think about this conundrum. When a departing employee's judgment gets encoded into a model, what do they actually own? What do you own of the IP that you generate in the context of your workplace? And really, what does anyone? In this world, there are not clear legal or philosophical answers. Usually, in the case of my employment contracts, The work that I produce for my employer is owned by them, but I have other IP that I produce for myself that's still owned by me. This is relatively common, especially in the software industry. But what is different now is when my employment relationship ends, the IP that I generated generally doesn't continue. What happens when the expertise that someone's generated, the ideas, the insight, the value for the business is encoded in a system that a company owns in perpetuity? It completely changes the dynamics. And it is especially important to think about this for workers with less bargaining power. Gig workers, contractors, mid-career employees in a tight labor market. With the macroeconomy the way it is, and everyone talking about how terrible it is to apply for a job right now, most people don't know they can, and even if they knew, might not feel comfortable negotiating protective clauses in their employment contracts that might preserve their ability to keep the unique expertise that they have as something that they own. Basically, we need new models. And the macroeconomic context expands this. In a challenging economy where cost of living is rising, workers in general have less bargaining power, which means that companies, if they're a little nefarious or maybe even just not thinking deeply about these issues, has the ability to extract someone's cognitive labor in a way that's incredibly exploitative. And so these are the kinds of questions that I hope if you are in an organization, you're asking. How does the company think about my rights to my expertise, but also how they will create the conditions, especially if you're a junior employee, to develop that expertise over time? Also, something I've been seeing in headlines is what I call the junior work problem. So there's a bit of pipeline logic here. Organizations generally across the economy develop senior talent by running people through junior work. I can tell you in my career that I did a lot of manual things that helped me develop the judgment and expertise required to operate at a more senior level. But AI is disproportionately automating that junior level work. And it doesn't just change the junior level job market, which in and of itself is something that we should be seriously looking at, but it also removes the opportunity for training for the seniors of 10 years from now. And this is not a future scenario. The legal, consulting, financial services, and creative industries are already dealing with these problems. And the reality is that this is not just a one company problem. This runs into something that political scientists or game theorists would call the tragedy of the commons. It is an individually rational choice, at least among some people, for each organization to do this so that they get the benefits of not paying for junior labor where they're paying for AI. But if every company in a market does this, we see, frankly, societal collapse. The tax base erodes, we lose the ability to train our experts of tomorrow, and there's just no one to buy the products. But there are very little structural ways to get companies to behave in more collaborative, pro-social, pro-economic system ways. And so again, this is another question that we need to be asking our organizations. And if I were feeling a little snarky, which I am, I would also talk about the idea that AI may actually not be cheaper than humans. So people right now are thinking, wow, one person with a Claude subscription can do the work of 3 people. But they're maybe forgetting that a lot of AI right now is deeply subsidized by VC dollars. That day is very quickly running out. As we know, a lot of even frontier models are moving to usage-based pricing. And so it might be that organizations automate a ton of work, and then 3 years down the road, they find out that their AI bills have blown out, and it actually would have just been cheaper to teach humans how to do the job in the first place. So again, complicating the narrative that efficiency one can be achieved, but also that it's a worthwhile goal, both for us individually, for the organization over the long term, and also for society as we know it. Now, I get that I've raised some uncomfortable questions here, but I hope that I've given them to you before irreversible decisions have been made. Now, I firmly believe that there is an incredible amount of value that we can get out of AI, but it is not the organizations that sprint forward the fastest towards technology that we have known catastrophic risks of harm, but rather it's the organizations that are thinking most clearly and deliberately about where and how they deploy these technologies, considering the impact on individuals, on team collaboration, and on society in which organizations are embedded. So I'm going to say it really plainly. Human dignity and creativity aren't soft considerations to balance against efficiency. They're conditions that actually make real transformation possible. To me, that's incredibly inspirational. So I want to leave you with 3 questions to take back to your organization. Which cognitive work are you automating, and who decided it should happen? What is your model for developing human judgment in an AI-augmented workplace? And how do you intentionally cognitively offload instead of cognitively surrender? And who is in the room where these decisions get made? Whose labor is being coded? Maybe without proper consent. Building powerful technology and building it well are absolutely not in conflict. But that only happens if we're each willing to ask uncomfortable questions before decisions are already made, so we can shape a future where things like well-being and human flourishing exist alongside value creation for organizations and customers. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am so excited to see what you do with these ideas. And if you want to hear a little more from me, I'm Aubrey Blanche. You can find me on LinkedIn or my website at aubreyblanche.com.